When the one you love falls into darkness, how far would you go to bring them back? For me, there was no limit, not even my own soul. When I first met Lily, she was sunlight in human form. Her laugh was the kind that made everyone turn to listen, her smile wide enough to chase away the darkest clouds. She had this way of seeing the world, finding beauty in even the smallest things. I used to watch her as she painted on the old canvas she kept by her bedroom window, her brow furrowed in concentration, her hands moving with precision and purpose. She was my everything, and to this day, I still can't pinpoint the exact moment the light in her began to dim. At first it was subtle. She started spending less time with her brushes and more time staring out of that same window, her once bright eyes now clouded with something I didn't understand. She began canceling plans, saying she was tired, and even when we were together she seemed far away. I told myself it was just a phase, that everyone gets lost in their thoughts sometimes, but the shadows that had begun to creep into her life refused to leave. As the weeks passed, her once vibrant energy dissolved into something quieter, something heavier. She stopped painting entirely. The easel that had once been the center of her world stood abandoned in the corner of her room, covered in dust. "It's nothing," she told me one evening when I finally mustered the courage to ask what was wrong. "I'm fine." But she wasn't fine. I could see it in the way she flinched at kindness, as though my love was something too fragile to hold. I could hear it in her voice when she whispered apologies for things that didn't need forgiving. I tried to reach her. I tried everything. I left flowers on her doorstep, hoping they'd remind her of the colors she used to love. I took her to the places that used to make her smile, the park with the old oak tree where we'd carved our initials, the beach where we'd once spent hours talking about dreams that seemed infinite. Nothing worked. One night, as we sat in silence on her couch, she finally spoke. "I'm not who I used to be," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "and I don't think I ever will be again." Her words shattered me. I wanted to tell her she was wrong, that the girl I loved was still there, buried beneath the weight of whatever she was carrying, but I didn't know how to say it, and I didn't know how to fix it. What I did know was that I couldn't give up on her. Not now, not ever. "I don't care how long it takes," I told her, taking her hand in mine. "I'm not leaving. Whatever it is, we'll get through it together. I promise." Even as she turned away, her hand slipping from mine, I held on to that promise, because I couldn't imagine a world without Lily in it, and I was willing to fight for her, even if it meant losing myself in the process. No matter how much I tried, Lily only seemed to drift further away. Her laughter, once so free and contagious, was now a ghost I hadn't heard in weeks. She stopped returning my texts, and when I knocked on her door, the excuses came faster. "I'm tired. I'm busy. I'm fine." But she wasn't fine, and every time she pushed me away, it felt like another piece of her was slipping through my fingers. Then came the night everything broke. I had been standing outside her apartment for over an hour, the cold biting through my jacket. I'd called her 3 times that day, left messages she never returned. Something wasn't right. I could feel it in my chest. Finally, I decided to knock. No answer. I knocked again, harder this time, but all I was met with was silence. "Lily?" I called, pressing my ear against the door. Still nothing. Panic rose in my throat as I fumbled for the spare key she'd given me months ago. When I finally managed to unlock the door, I was greeted by darkness. The apartment felt colder than the night outside, the air heavy and still, and there she was. Lily sat curled up in the corner of the room, her knees pulled to her chest. Her hair was tangled, her clothes rumpled, and her arms were wrapped tightly around herself as though holding her body together was all she had the strength to do. Surrounding her were scattered pieces of paper, some crumpled, others soaked in paint that had been smeared in angry streaks. "Lily," I whispered, rushing toward her. Her head lifted slowly, her eyes bloodshot and hollow. "James," she murmured, her voice barely audible. "What's going on?" I asked, kneeling beside her. "Talk to me, please." She shook her head, tears spilling down her cheeks. I can't do this anymore. I'm tired of pretending." "Pretending what?" I asked, my voice cracking. "That you're okay? You don't have to pretend with me. I'm here. Just let me help you." But she only buried her face in her hands, trembling. "You don't understand," she sobbed. "I'm broken, James. There's nothing left to save." Her words hit me like a punch to the chest, but I couldn't let them win. I couldn't let her believe them. I wrapped my arms around her, holding her as tightly as I could. She resisted at first, but eventually her sobs softened, her body leaning into mine. That night, as I stayed by her side, I realized the fight for her wasn't just about words or love. It was bigger than that. The darkness she was battling wasn't going to let her go easily, and if I was going to save her, I would have to risk everything. Her despair wasn't just hers anymore. It was ours. And no matter how deep it went, I was ready to follow her into it, if it meant pulling her back into the light. Saving Lily meant more than staying by her side. It meant stepping into a darkness I didn't understand. A world where nothing I'd learned about love or strength seemed to matter. Her despair wasn't logical, and neither was the journey I began to save her. The first step was isolation. Lily pulled away from everyone else in her life, and by loving her, I found myself pulled along. Friends stopped calling when I missed plans to be with her, and even my family started asking questions I couldn't answer. "Why can't you just leave?" they'd ask, their voices filled with concern I didn't have time to acknowledge. I knew what they meant. Why would you risk yourself for someone who might not come back from this? But I couldn't walk away. The hardest part wasn't the loneliness. It was the doubt. There were nights I'd sit outside her apartment after she'd locked herself inside, my hands shaking with frustration. What if I couldn't help her? What if everything I was doing, every gentle word, every patient moment, wasn't enough? Those questions clawed at my resolve, whispering that I was too small for the fight ahead. Still, I pushed forward. I dove into the world she had retreated from, trying to find pieces of her in the things she'd abandoned. Her art, once filled with bold colors and hopeful themes, now sat unfinished, the canvases streaked with angry blacks and reds. I tried to understand her through those paintings, searching for clues, but they only left me feeling more lost. Then there were the moments of temptation, moments where it would have been easier to walk away. I thought about what my life could look like without this weight, without the constant ache of trying to save someone who didn't want to be saved. Friends told me I deserved better, and a small voice in the back of my mind whispered that maybe they were right, but then I'd see her, a glimmer of the Lily I fell in love with, and the doubts would fade. Sometimes it was as simple as the way she'd look at me when she thought I wasn't watching, her eyes holding a flicker of the girl I'd known before. Those moments were rare, but they were enough to keep me going. The journey wasn't just about her, it was about me too. I had to confront my own fear of failure, my need to fix everything when some things couldn't be fixed. Loving her taught me that this wasn't about being her savior. It was about being her anchor, the one thing she could hold on to when the waves got too rough. And so I stayed. Through the silence, the doubt, the temptation to give up, I stayed. Each step deeper into her darkness was a test of my strength, but I was willing to take it, no matter the cost. Because saving Lily wasn't just a choice, it was my purpose. The night I truly found Lily was the night I realized how far she'd fallen and how much I was willing to risk to bring her back. She had locked herself away for days, ignoring my calls, my knocks, my pleas to let me in. I'd tried to give her space, telling myself she needed time. But when her landlord called, saying she hadn't paid rent and hadn't been seen in a week, I knew time wasn't something we could afford. When I reached her apartment, it felt like stepping into a place abandoned by light. The curtains were drawn, the air thick and stale. Her paintings, once so vibrant and alive, had been slashed with jagged streaks of black and gray, as if she had tried to erase the colors that had once defined her. And there she was, curled on the floor in the corner of the room, her back pressed against the wall. Her face was pale, her hair unkempt, and her eyes were hollow, like the spark I once knew had been extinguished. "Lily," I said softly, stepping closer. She didn't move. Her gaze was fixed on something I couldn't see, her arms wrapped around her knees like she was trying to hold herself together. "Lily, it's me," I said again, kneeling in front of her. "I'm here. Talk to me." At first, there was nothing. Then she spoke, her voice so quiet I barely heard it. "Why are you here, James? You can't fix this." Her words cut deep, but I refused to let them stop me. "I'm not here to fix you, Lily. I'm here to remind you who you are." She shook her head, tears slipping down her cheeks. "You don't get it. I'm not that person anymore. She's gone. I can't feel anything, James. Not love, not hope, nothing." Her voice cracked, and I saw the pain she had been carrying, the weight that had crushed her. For a moment, doubt whispered in my ear again, telling me she was too far gone. But then I remembered the girl who had once laughed with her whole heart, who had seen beauty in everything, even the cracks in the sidewalk. That girl was still in there, I just had to reach her. I took her hands in mine, ignoring the way she tried to pull away. "You're still here, Lily," I said, my voice steady. You're still the girl who painted sunsets, who danced in the rain, who made me believe in things I didn't think were possible. You're still the girl I love, and I'm not giving up on you." Her eyes filled with tears, but she shook her head again. "I don't deserve that. I don't deserve you. You deserve everything," I said, leaning closer. "And I'll fight for you until you believe it too." Her sobs broke through then, raw and unrestrained. I held her as she cried, feeling the faintest flicker of warmth return. It wasn't the end of her despair, but it was the beginning of something new, hope. I knew words alone weren't enough to bring Lily back from the edge. Her pain was a weight she carried silently, too afraid to let anyone share the burden. If I was going to save her, I had to prove that she didn't have to fight this battle alone, even if it meant losing a part of myself in the process. The breaking point came late one night. Lily had started to pull back again, retreating into her mind like she always did when the darkness became too much. I had been sitting with her, watching her stare out the window, her expression blank. I was desperate to reach her, to remind her of the love and light that still existed. Then I remembered her paintings. Those canvases were her soul, the pieces of herself she had once poured into the world. They were messy, vibrant, and unapologetically hers. But they'd sat untouched for months, the tools of her passion forgotten in the shadow of her despair. I walked over to her easel, pulling it into the center of the room. "Do you remember this?" I asked, holding up one of her old brushes. "This used to be everything to you." She glanced at it briefly, then turned away. "Not anymore," she said, her voice flat. Her dismissal felt like a knife to the chest, but I refused to back down. "Then let me show you why it still matters," I said. Before I could lose my nerve, I picked up one of the brushes and dipped it into the nearest paint jar. I wasn't an artist, and the brush felt awkward in my hand, but that didn't matter. I dragged bold streaks of color across the canvas, letting the paint splatter without rhyme or reason. I could feel her watching me, her silence heavy with confusion. "What are you doing?" she finally asked. "Making a mess," I said, forcing a smile. "Your turn." She shook her head. "I can't. I don't even know where to start anymore." "Then start with this," I said, holding out the brush to her. "I'm not asking you to fix anything or make something perfect, just make something. Anything." For a long moment she didn't move. Then slowly, she reached out and took the brush from my hand. Her fingers trembled as she dipped it into the paint, hesitant and unsure, but as she pressed it to the canvas, something shifted. The brush moved more easily with each stroke, and I could see a spark, small but unmistakable, flicker in her eyes. I stepped back, giving her the space she needed, and as I watched her paint, I realized what I'd sacrificed. My pride, my sense of control, all of it had been stripped away in my effort to reach her, but none of it mattered. The only thing that mattered was that Lily was finding herself again, piece by piece, with every stroke of the brush. It wasn't just her salvation, it was ours. The weeks that followed weren't easy, but they were different. For the first time in months, Lily began to return to herself, not all at once, but in small, beautiful ways. It started with the little things, the way her fingers lingered on her paintbrushes as she walked past the easel, the faint curve of a smile when I cracked one of my terrible jokes, and the way she held my hand just a little tighter when the weight of the world felt too much to bear. Her healing wasn't a straight line. Some days were good, almost normal. Others were hard, filled with moments when she doubted herself, when the shadows threatened to creep back in. But we faced them together. When she felt like she couldn't go on, I reminded her of the progress she'd made. When I felt overwhelmed by the weight of trying to hold us both steady, she reassured me that I didn't have to do it alone. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and bathed her apartment in soft golden light, I found her sitting at the easel. She was painting again, not the dark, chaotic streaks of despair I had seen before, but something softer, more hopeful. The canvas was covered in muted blues and gentle yellows, and for the first time in so long her hands moved with purpose. "It's not finished," she said when she noticed me watching. "It doesn't have to be," I replied. "It's enough that you're trying." She smiled, a real, unguarded smile that reached her eyes. "Thank you," she said softly. "For what?" I asked, stepping closer. "For staying. For believing in me when I couldn't believe in myself." Her words made my chest tighten, and in that moment, I realized just how far we'd come. Loving Lily had never been about saving her. It had been about walking beside her, even when the path was dark and uncertain. It had been about holding on to hope when she couldn't, about showing her that she wasn't alone, no matter how heavy her burdens felt. Together, we rebuilt the pieces of her life. She started painting more often, her work slowly regaining the vibrancy it once had. She even suggested we take one of her pieces to an art show, a small but significant step toward reclaiming the part of herself she thought she'd lost forever. As I stood beside her that night, watching her talk to strangers about her art with a spark in her eyes I hadn't seen in so long, I felt a quiet pride, not just in her but in us, in what we had fought for, what we had survived. Love isn't always a grand gesture or a perfect moment. Sometimes, it's simply the decision to stay, to fight, to believe. Lily taught me that, and together we learned that even in the deepest despair, love has the power to heal, to restore, and to bring light where there once was none. How far would you go to save the one you love? Would you risk everything, your time, your strength, even your own heart, to bring them back from the brink? Share your thoughts or stories in the comments below. I'd love to hear how love has changed your life. If this story touched you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more deeply moving tales of love, sacrifice, and hope. Share this video with someone who believes in the power of love. You never know who might need to hear it.